Praise, we praise, 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 praise to the one who sent us his Son. Praise, 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 in one accord we praise you, O Lord.
Amen. This gentleman in the video that we just watched had a lot of problems, had a lot of things going on in his life, a lot of difficulties. And I think at this time that we can all identify with him. The first point I want to make today, as we look at the book of Job, is Job is normally seen as a great poem. In fact, Tennyson said it was the greatest poem of ancient or modern times. And he himself was revered as one of the greatest poets that we've ever produced in the English language. It's a great poem, and the theme is a universal theme. The theme is suffering. And the reason why it is such an attractive theme is because we all experience suffering. In fact, the reason why I had Wayne read Psalm 53 is because even Jesus suffered. Jesus was acquainted with grief, a man of sorrows. Suffering is part of our life. While we're alive, we experience suffering. And so it raises questions to us about, is there a God? If there is a God, is he interested in me? Why is it that everybody keeps picking on me, as Charlie Brown said? There seems to be a mountain that weighs down on us to the point where we are almost crushed by it. And as this gentleman in the video that we just watched, he enumerated his problems with his families and his health and everything that came about in his life, his finances. These things weigh up on us. So we're in the middle of the coronavirus. We're in the middle of quarantining. Many of us haven't been able to go to work or are concerned about our finances. We're concerned about the fact that we had contact with our family. We're concerned that we can't travel. Plans that we made for a long time aren't being able to be accomplished at this point. And so the idea of suffering and deprivation and grief, and obviously in the midst of this, people dying. Friends and relatives getting very ill. Some people are concerned about their own health, that they're going to get sick and perhaps they're going to die. And the fact that people have died and that we have to mourn them, and yet sometimes we can't even go to a funeral because only 9 people can be in a room together, and we can't have a funeral ceremony with the 50 or 100 people that would normally like to have come to that funeral. So we're considering the book of Job over the next 6 weeks. It deals with the questions of suffering. It deals with God's role in suffering and his role in our lives. The fancy word for this is theodicy. It means literally to make a defense of God, to speak on behalf of God, to explain why God does things the way that God does them. And I think that one of the major things that we deal with here is that we don't always know what's really going on. And so the one thing that we do know is that suffering is universal. If a person has drawn a breath into their lungs, they have experienced suffering. They know about suffering. In the book of Job, there's a man that's presented to us who is extremely wealthy. It enumerates that he has 7 sons and 3 daughters. He has 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, that's 1,000 oxen, 500 female donkeys. So you presume that he has lots of small donkeys, offspring. He literally has thousands of head of cattle. And he is identified as the greatest of the men of the East, or the sons of the East. His sons, being the offspring of a very wealthy father, are able to spend a whole week in feasting. And they go from one person's house to the next, one brother's house to the next, and they invite their 3 sisters to come along. And they feast. But at the end of this time, it underscores Job, who's referred to in the King James Bible as perfect and upright. Other translations have it that he's blameless. He is a man that has done the things of God, and yet he is concerned about his family. And so he does sacrifice, and he says, perhaps my sons have sinned in their heart. They've cursed God where people can't see it in the innermost being. It says in the scripture that man looks on the outside, but God looks at the heart. There are many people today that are hypocritical. In fact, one of the primary reasons why people say, I don't want to go to church, is because of the hypocrites that are there. Job was aware that maybe even his own children would be hypocrites, and he sacrificed and prayed on their behalf. He interceded for them. And so this man has everything going for him. He has financial wealth. It's an agrarian sort of wealth, so it's based on a head of cattle, and that agrarian wealth is not just I have money today, but it's that these animals will continue to produce for many years into the future, and that their offspring will produce other offsprings. He has many servants that are working for him, perhaps slaves, perhaps free servants. It doesn't really enumerate the difference between that. But the idea is he has a large entourage of people that are helping him run his various operations, and he has a large family in the Middle East at this time. It's very interesting and very important for you to have children, and that those children would take a responsibility for their parents and to care for them, to look after them in old age. And so he had everything going for him. He had a loyal wife. He has a wife that stays with him throughout all of the trials and tribulations, the difficulties that he has. And he has a cadre of friends that come, and the first couple chapters that we're dealing with today, in that time, they come when he has great adversity, and they sit for a week. They take a week out of their schedules. They leave their jobs. They leave their responsibilities. They leave their families, and they sit with him in silence for a week. Most Americans have difficulty sitting in silence for 30 seconds. In fact, it's pretty funny on Zoom here that we'll be studying a passage of the Bible in one of our Bible studies, and I will not say anything. I'm trying to provoke somebody to bring something up or ask a question, and goes, oh, what's wrong? Is the computer broken? I can't hear anything. And because we expect non-stop input, non-stop noise, Job's friends loved him enough to acknowledge that his grief was very great, and they sat and they waited on him for a week. So this guy has everything going for him, and yet he has great adversity that comes upon him for no apparent reason. Now, the Bible then switches to what I call Act 2, and it focuses on a convention of angels. They're referred to as the sons of God in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, sons of God are members of the church or Christians, the children of God. But in the Old Testament, sons of God refers to angels, these alien-type beings, one of which killed, I believe, 75,000 people in one night. They're called ministers of flames of fire. They're apparently can go very rapidly, perhaps even at the speed of light. They can go through walls. They can perhaps change their appearance. They're very powerful, and they're very ancient, and they are not human. It says that angels long to look into the things that God prepared for us through the salvation through Jesus Christ. And you get the idea that they don't quite see things the way that humans see things. They're an alien race, and they have alien values. So there's this convention of them, and they're called to present themselves before God, to give an answer for their behavior and the things that are involved, because even Shaitan, or Satan, the adversary, is there. He's referred to as, he's the serpent in the garden, he's the devil, he's Beelzebul. He has all of these titles: the great deceiver, the father of lies, murderer from the first. All of these are titles and enumerations of him. But he comes, and God says, what have you been up to? And in the first chapter, he says this: Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from roaming about the earth and walking on it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. I think people often fall into the error of dualism when they think about God and Satan. They think that there's some sort of equivalency between the two of them, that they are both supernatural, powerful beings, but that there is some sort of equivalency where they like have arm wrestling competitions or fist fights, or that they have great armies that wield very advanced weapons, lasers and explosions and lightning, whatever. They think that they're in one of the Avenger movies. They don't grasp the reality that they're not in one of the Avenger movies. Because in the Avengers, those are all just finite beings. Those are all just beings, some more powerful than others. But it's just like a battle royal of the World Wrestling Federation, of a bunch of different wrestlers that have different abilities that get together and they fight each other. What we're talking about is the creator of the universe versus one of his creations. And that Lucifer, or the devil, or Satan, may be one of the greatest of those creations, but he is still at a magnitude level below God. If you can think of an ant standing on a road in Africa and staring up, and he sees a great shadow, and he yells at the shadow, "Stop!" And the elephant steps on him and goes on its way. It's not even that the elephant won the fight. There wasn't a fight. It wasn't even that the elephant ignored the command. He didn't hear the command. The elephant is on another whole plane of existence. And so when God comes to Lucifer and he says, "Hey, tell me what you've been up to," it is God coming to Lucifer, not Lucifer coming to God. Lucifer has presented himself, but it's God that has to open the conversation and ask a question. I want to insert kind of a weird thing in here is that I believe that the devils and even Satan pray. Wow, what's that? Well, I think that people have kind of weird ideas about what prayer is, but not all prayers are good or pious or righteous. People, even human beings, have prayers for a variety of different motivations and reasons. And some of those prayers are flat out selfish and self-serving and malicious towards other people. Satan and in the New Testament, some demonic beings ask for things from God, and God grants those. Those are grantings of prayers. A prayer is a request, something that you're asking for. And God is not compelled to, God doesn't have to, but God does answer those prayers on occasion. This is one of the times when he does that. Satan's response about Job is this. Then Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? And you've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But put forth your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." Now, there's people that have disputes about when the book of Job was written. The events and the portrayal of the events appear to have been perhaps in the time of Abraham, certainly before the time of Moses. There is no reference to a temple. In fact, the writer, or not the writer, but I'm sorry, Job is Idumean. He's an Edomite. He's one of the descendants of Esau. He's not from the people of Israel, the children of Israel, but he's one of their cousins, another Semitic group of people that lived in the Middle East. And the people that he interacts with are not the people that the Jews were interacting with in their time. And he interacts with people at a great distance. He's conversant about Egypt and Mesopotamia and other locations as well. So, in this passage, he says the problem is that you're too good to Job. If you would shake him up a bit, he would curse you. This sounds eerily reminiscent of the creation story. When the serpent came not to God, but to Eve, and said, has God said that you can't touch this fruit, and he knows if you eat of it, you'll become like him. And he drives a wedge between the creator and the creation, between God and man, between God and Eve in that particular story. In this story, he's attempting to drive the same wedge, but he's doing it with God. He's saying to God, well, you are hopelessly naive. The devil recognizes that he is in a struggle, but it's not a struggle of power or force. It's a struggle in the mind and the heart. And here he's going literally after the mind and the heart of God. He's attempting to deceive God. He's attempting to plant seeds of animosity in God towards his servant Job, who's been so faithful to him. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not put your hand on him. So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. So here we find that there is a allowance by God. Satan apparently did not have the ability to do this unilaterally. He appears to be somewhat put out about Job. He has a particular fixation about him because God has a fixation about Job. He sees Job as a righteous man, and the devil keeps saying that he can make Job curse God. I want you to think about this. Jesus gave a command that you should love God and love your neighbor. That was the essence. He said the whole law was summarized in that. Well, as you view this is in stark contrast to the way the devil operates. The devil operates either by giving you stuff that you're not supposed to have, that God has told you not to have. Hey, you can eat that fruit. Go ahead. It's good. You'll be wise. You'll get stuff out of it. Or out of fear. He comes to Job and he picks on the areas that Job has no control over. Job cannot control lightning coming down and destroying his animals and his servants. Job cannot control wandering bands of Chaldeans that are coming. Job cannot control a tornado that comes and destroys the home of the home of one of his sons, where the 10 children are having a feast and they all die. All these things happen to Job, and he's devastated. Yet in the midst of it, his response is profound. He says this. Comes out and he enumerates all of the things. And then Job in chapter 1, verse 21, verse 20, it says, he tore his robe and shaved his head and fell to the ground and worshipped. He worshipped God in the midst of this. I hear people all the time, talk about how they like to yell at God, they like to have arguments with God, they like to tell God the way that it is. I think that if you really believe in God, that stuff is all kind of silly. I know that you're emotionally upset. I know that you're disturbed. I know that you are grieving. And I think that God knows that too. But if God is really there, I don't think that we are in a position to judge his actions because we don't know what's really going on. I think that oftentimes we're operating on small amounts of information and we're extrapolating from that our ideas of the way the universe works. That's why people say the number one reason they don't believe in God is because of the problem of evil. Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, Job is an absolute example of a good person who horrible things happen to, because Satan comes back and he raises the stakes. He not only goes after his property, but he goes after his health. He gets permission from God to afflict his body. He has cysts all over his body that are rising, and he's cutting them with a potsherd, and he's setting in ashes because it's the only soft place that he can sit, and his backside is full of these sores. And you think, man, this guy is going to just lose it. He lost all his property, he lost all of his children, and his response was to worship God and to say this: Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In other words, I trust God. God has given me a lot of good stuff in my life, and now I have some bad stuff in my life. I trust God in the midst of this. He has 4 buddies that come and join him when he gets sick. His wife has encouraged him to curse God and die. And his response to her is, "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips." And it says that his pain was very great. His friends acknowledge this. They come and they sit in silence around him for 7 days. I want to point out here the loyalty of Job's friends. You know, many times when people have adversity in their life, they have a setback, they lose their business, they get fired, the boss demotes them. People shrink away from people who they think are on the downward spiral. People get sick. I think even in this time of the COVID-19, I think that people are afraid to be around sick people sometimes. Even people that they loved and were part of their family previously, but they're afraid of the fact that they might get the disease from them. It might be spreading. In the same way, when people have financial adversity, when they have setbacks, when they lose their job, people tend to shrink away from them because it's almost like they feel like that they're going to catch that from the other person. The person's going through hard times, and maybe they got bad luck, and I'm going to get some of that bad luck on me. So they superstitiously try to avoid that. I want to make just a couple of what I think are important points here. The first is that suffering is universal. All of us have suffered, going to suffer. It even says that righteous people in the New Testament, all who will live godly in Christ Jesus, will suffer persecution. The second thing is suffering comes from a variety of reasons. In this one, it was expressly at the request of Satan against an individual, but I'm not saying that, you know, when a baby's born with a birth defect, or when you lose your job, or there's a variety of things. Some of us have people that hate us and spread rumors and try to break up our marriages or to make people think badly of us. They gossip and they backbite. Whether it's supernatural things, whether it's just natural occurrences of a broken and fallen world, whether it's people that are maliciously out to get us, there's suffering, and it comes from a variety of different places. I mean, some of it's just part of life. We all acknowledge that we're going to die, but when friends and relatives die that we're very close to, it's traumatic, it's difficult, we have grief. The third thing is that we often don't know what that reason is. Sometimes we would look at a person and say, well, you know, he lived a long and full life, and he was 89 years old, or he was 105. I just saw some lady that was like 106 that recovered from the COVID virus. I was just stunned. But just a militant, strong, healthy lady at you know, the end of her life. She wasn't willing to accept the fact that she had lived a long, full life, and this was the time that it was supposed to be over. She fought her way through it. But we don't know what the reason is, why suffering and grief and just difficulties come into our life. And the fourth thing that we need to bear in mind, and I think that this is really absolutely important, we're going to get to God, God's justice, whether this was just of God to do what he did to allow it to have done to Job. But God was not absent from Job's life. I think that many of us, the devil comes and whispers in our ear and he says, God really doesn't care what's happening to you. God doesn't know what's happening to you, and God doesn't care what's happening to you. And with that in mind, I would like to challenge you that when things get difficult, worship God. Trust God. When things are going good, bless God. The Lord giveth. When things are going bad, say, the Lord taketh away. Naked you came into the world, and naked you'll go out of it. You know, your car, your house, your property, you're not going to take it with you. People say, well, I don't live for material things, I live for my family. Well, Job had all of his children wiped out. You can lose everything, but are you going to lose the Lord? See, Jesus said it in an opposite way. He said a man can gain the whole world and yet lose his own soul. In the opposite way, you can lose everything, but still gain your own soul. And I think that that's the way that we need to live, lightly holding on to the things that are ours. And by the things, I talk about our health, about our happiness, about our wholeness, about the things that are in it. Expect that there are times that are going to come that are going to be difficult. We don't rejoice because, difficult times calling. I don't pray, hey God, send me hard times. I don't have enough hard times. The Bible actually says that each day has enough trouble for itself. And it warns that people should not become anxious about what's going to happen in the future, but that they should live in the present. And so I want to challenge you to look at the life of Job as a man who had great grief and difficulty, didn't know why it was happening, but was able to trust God in the midst of that. And I think that that's where we need to start this journey about suffering. We acknowledge it's there. We acknowledge that all people are going to experience it. We acknowledge that we don't know why it happens many times. But in the midst of it, God has not forgotten us or abandoned us.